Hey everybody, this is Perch. Um, Comic books is a small business, meaning, if you think about the grand landscape of entertainment businesses, comic books is a relatively niche or small part of that. Now, it didn't always used to be that way, but let's not kid ourselves. And this is one of those things where I think people retcon in their own minds where comic books were at. Comic books were never, massive, massive successes. It's not like comic books ran the world. Comic books were in newsstands for sure. There was more of a cultural impact of comics, but comic books at best was kind of medium zone. If you look at the 90s when, people were putting big numbers up on the board and you had Liefeld, Lee, and others selling millions of copies of comics, Todd McFarlane. But you know what's interesting, by the way, as an aside, is that Liefeld and Lee are mentioned more often as being the big comic book sellers, and Todd McFarlane has dropped in terms of overall conversation and stature. Have you noticed this? I could pause for a second and think about this in your own mind, because if you were a fan of comics in the 90s, Todd drawing Spider-Man was the shit. That was the be-all, end-all. I think there was a lot of arguments in the comic shop over who had the bigger cultural impact. Was it Todd or was it Jim Lee with X-Men? And I mean, this was a hearty debate that would had. No disrespect to Rob Liefeld. He did a lot of things, but Liefeld on New Mutants and X-Force was not equivalent to Todd on Spider-Man or Jim on X-Men. That was the pinnacle you had there. And if you'd been collecting comics for any length of time, if you're like me, you're going, well, what the fuck about Art Adams, Alan Davis, George Perez, Neil Adams, Jack Kirby. You had lots of amazing comic artists during this period, but the big battle was Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane. And today, in 2024, you have a lot of people talking about Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld. It's interesting how Liefeld has kind of moved into that spot. Liefeld, through the late 90s, early 2000s, had a rougher road. But anyway, put all of that aside, even if you think about that kind of heyday of comics when things were going really, really well for people, comic books were still a medium to niche business. It was on the rise, and I think there was more and more kind of cultural impact of comics. You had kind of Death of Superman hitting the news, and you had a lot of these moments. But all the same, it was still modest business. And when I look at comics, and I have conversations with a variety of people within the business, the thing that I'm often struck by is how comic books how people in comics are often portrayed, or at least acknowledge the business as, they're willing to accept that it's small. They're willing. It always bothers me, and I have conversations with a lot of people in comics, and yeah, I hate to kind of do this because I'm putting the guy on the spot, and I'm paraphrasing his words quite a lot. But I saw Sean Murphy in Dallas recently, and when I talk to Sean, one thing that comes across for me is that Sean wants comics to be big. I think he recognizes that he alone, as an individual, can't make comics big all by himself. And he hasn't said that out loud. I'm purely speculating, so maybe this is entirely unfair. But he does want comics to get bigger than it is, and I think he views it as make comics bigger, and then stabilize that, and then make comics bigger again, and stabilize that, and like continually take steps up, like you're walking up a staircase. And that's really how comics should be. That's how comics should be. That's how people should look at comics. That's how, if you're in this business, you should view the industry that way. And I'm saying all this from a standpoint of, if I don't know where you work right now. Any of you can work any number of places, right? And my guess is that for the majority of you, if you're in any kind of company or corporation or business or anything, your boss, your board, your leadership, or maybe you're in that leadership, I don't know. But you probably frequently talk about how to make your business bigger. Your goal is to be number one. I want you to think about wherever you work right now. And unless you're Arby's, most of you are probably thinking, when I go to my office, our goal, whether it's spoken or unspoken, our goal is to be number one. Now, let's say you're some kind of like you're a body shop repair garage, right? You work in this thing and you're fixing cars. My guess is at some point you or the people who work for you or the people you work for have talked about how you want to be the best goddamn body shop repair place in town, right? You talk about wanting to be number one. Maybe you run advertisements. Maybe you talk about how the competition sucks and you're better than them in some way. I don't know what you're doing, but whatever your company is, whether it's a garage in a city, or whether you work for Amazon, or whether you work for I don't know, a hospital, whether you're a doctor, I don't know. I'm guessing that many of you have had conversations that go along the lines of, we want to be number one today. Or we're not number one, but we're fighting to be number one, right? Does that fit most of you? In the comments, would you please say that? Like, hey, I want to be number one, or my company talks about being number one, or I mean, that is what you're saying, right? Because I would like to know if your company is sitting there going, fuck it, we don't need to be successful. I don't want to be number one. I just, we can be number two. We can be number three. We can be nothing. I mean, is that how your company operates? My guess is that somewhere along the line, either at your level or above you or below you, there's a push, to be the best goddamn thing that exists. You want to win. That is the goal, to win. Right? Please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, is anybody out there not trying to win? Why would you be playing if you don't want to try and win? And what does this have to do with comics? Because, and I'm just telling you from personal experience, a lot of people within comics are very satisfied not winning. And this isn't, by the way, like a political thing, like Trump's like, we want to win. I'm not talking about like fake, like slogan winning. I'm talking about truly winning. Marvel is currently number one in comics. They don't act like it. If you work for Marvel right now, I'm sorry to say, and I don't mean any insult by it, you don't act like you want to be number one. DC is sort of number two. They definitely do not act like they want to be number one. Half the time, people at DC are not answering phone calls, just fucking around. Creators are doing things. Like, they act like they're very satisfied being second place. Image, I don't know what the fuck they're doing. And a lot of independents are putting out comics, but there's no drive. There's no hunger. Every now and then, like Dinesh and Bad Ideas will say something like, we want to kill everybody else. Good. You should be saying that. Like, you should have this drive, because the thing I'm trying to point out to you is it's unnatural not to have more drive here. I want you to think about whoever's listening to this right now, and maybe some of you listening to the comic industry. I know a lot of people in comics do. This is, from what I'm told, one of the highest viewed shows inside the comic industry, but nobody will admit they watch it. But anyway, or listen to it. I mean, this is a listening show. I hate the fact that there's any kind of video aspect to this at all. Why am I doing this on YouTube? I don't fucking know. Anyway, but it's unnatural. It's thoroughly unnatural for people not to push being number one. And yet comics doesn't push for this. They're almost embarrassed by this. I've had conversations with people in comics who say, well, it's kind of embarrassing and it's not really right to say you want to be number one. I mean, like, this is an artist community. Like we shouldn't, like, that's kind of gross to have that kind of competition. No, it's not. That's how business is done. You want to be number one. Before anyone goes into the political social war aspect of this, one of the big lies about communism is that there's still people wanting to be number one. Even in the system where communism works, which is nowhere, but even in theory, you still have the person who has to sell bread for the same price as every other place selling bread still wants to be known as the best bread maker in town. There's a personal pride aspect of it. So why is it that comics is satisfied not being in that race? It's unnatural. And we talk, lots of people give you lots of opinions on where comics are going wrong or where things could be better, that too much this or that or whatever it happens to be. But a lot of it stems with one thing. Be number one today. Go out and push that you're number one. If you're an artist, look down at your work. Is it good? I mean, if you're working on it, you probably believe it's good. So go all in on that. Fuck it. Fuck everyone else. Be number one. The next time you go to a convention and you set up your table, fuck everybody else. You're making the most money at this show. How are you going to make more money than anyone else? And if you don't care about money, that's fine. Some people do. You want to be the one who's most talked about. You want to be the one people remember. Whatever gets you off, man, whether it's cash or attention or praise or volume of people coming by your table, whatever it is, be number one. Competition is good. Competition exists in every other industry. Again, I ask you, and I really like this isn't a joke. Think about it in your own life. Whatever the fuck it is you're doing in your life. And maybe it's a hobby. I met a guy the other day who's like, my goal is to have the number one lawn in my neighborhood. Okay, that's a dumbass goal, but fine. Your goal is to have the greenest, best cut lawn in your neighborhood. Even though I think that's a little bit insane, that still makes sense. You're trying to be the best at something. Anything should be the best at something. So for comics, be the best at something. Be the best company. Be the best artist. Be the best editor. Be the best leader. Be the best at something. For God's sake, are you not going home wanting to be better than others? If you're Jordan White, aren't you going home wanting to be the best goddamn ukulele player in all the editorial pool? I don't know what the fuck you're doing, but be the best at something. Do you realize, all of you, how much better all of this shit would be if comics and publishers tried to be the best at something? Somebody came up to me like, aren't you glad that the DC and Marvel aren't having the comic book wars anymore where the two companies weren't fighting? I'm like, no, it sucks that they're not doing that. They should do that. Be number one. Marvel is number one by default. They're not number one by effort. DC is number two also by default, both for good and bad. They're not trying to be number one. They're not. I'm sorry. When Marie Javins goes to a convention and says, I don't even know what I'm doing here. Like, fuck, you're not even trying. Be number one. And a lot of you, I've met so many of you, and all of you are capable of being number one. I'll call somebody out who I think is like Kevin McGuire. To me, is an amazing goddamn artist. I grew up with him. I so many comic memories I have. Are you telling me that if you've read comics for any length of time and you don't remember Batman punching out Guy Gardner in one punch, like that is a goddamn iconic scene in comics. If I'm Kevin McGuire, I'm showing up and I'm just like got my dick out like, hey, fuck all you guys. I did the scene where Batman punched out Guy Gardner in one punch, and I also drew that picture of the Justice League all kind of looking up into the camera on a cover. Fuck all y'all. That's what I do. Like, in all seriousness, that's epic level work. You don't have to prove anything else other than show up as number one. I've gone to so many conventions where McGuire is tabling there. Be number one. If you're Ben Templesmith, you are the best goddamn horror artist there is. Fuck it, you are. So be number one. You own it. There's so many great artists and writers out there who are the best in class. And I hope when you've had a couple drinks, you go back to a hotel room or whatever else, I hope you look yourself in the mirror and you say, I am goddamn number one, because you are. And that, as it will feel a little arrogant when you do it, may feel a little egotistical when you do it, you should do it because you own it. And if you feel that way and you start to walk around with a little bit more of that swagger, don't become a full-on egomaniac. You're not Tom King here. Own your own success, and push to be number one. You are. And I think comics will be way healthier as a result. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. Um, thanks for listening.